Alright, today's topic is going to be multiplication and division of rational numbers, and we're going to talk just some starting points, I suppose. Multiplication, division of rational numbers. Remember, rational numbers are ratios. You got an A over a B, so you got the numerator part, you got the denominator part. Numerator and denominator. Remember, the numerator's on top, denominator's on bottom. So we're going to talk about multiplying and then dividing and then converting. So today we're going to talk about multiplication of rational numbers. Essentially what we're talking about with multiplication of rational numbers is a product. A product of two rational numbers, 2/3. You can say it as 2/3 times 4/5. You can also say 2/3 with the x meaning times. You can say 2/3 times 4/5 or 2/3 of 4/5. Of and times are kind of interchangeable in mathematics. 2/3 of 4/5 means 2/3 times. So keep in mind that when we multiply fractions, here's our kind of take-home message. When we're multiplying fractions, it's the product of the numerators over the product of the denominators. So 1/5 times 2/3 means we got one big numerator, 1 times 2. We've got one big denominator, 5 times 3. 1 times 2 over 5 times 3. 1 times 2 is 2. 5 times 3 is 15. And hey, we're done. Same thing over here, just different example. 3/4 times 5/8. 3/4 of 5/8. 3 times 5. 15. 4 times 8. 32. Done. We'd have to simplify. So a lot of times we'll have to simplify, especially when we add, subtract, or multiply or divide. We'll just have to get to simplify. But these two examples are just kind of examples of what we do. So we multiply, remember, when we see parentheses, or when we see the dot, or when we see, I suppose, the x. Not so common anymore, but because that x could be a variable. But when we see dot, or when we see parentheses, we multiply. And we got to simplify too after we take a look at multiplications. So I'm going to put one in blue and one in red, and I'm going to say, you know what, here, or sorry, I guess one in blue, one in green. Here's my one fraction, here's my other fraction. Here's my green fraction, that's my blue fraction. What we do is we get one big numerator, one big denominator. I got 3, and I got 4, and I've got also my multiplied by 10 in my numerator, multiplied by 21 in my denominator, and if we wanted to move forward, we could, but you know what, from here, so there really can be two different ways you can approach this. You can say that 3 times 10 is 30, over 4 times 21, 84, and then simplify that way, or my recommendation, I suppose, is keep this blue and green combination and simplify over here because everything's factored already. Because if you go over here, you've got to factor things out. Factor, cancel, reduce, simplify this blue fraction. But if things are factored out already over here, why not just keep factoring over here? So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say, you know what, my 3 remains and my 4 can be called 2 times 2. My blue fraction, if I'm going to factor my 10, I'm going to say 10 is 2 times 5, prime factor that. 21 is 3 times 7, and now look to cancel, simplify, factor out, reduce any factors that are common. So you could look at and say, well, I've got a 3 divided by 3 is 1, so that would basically can be simplified out. 2 divided by 2 can be canceled, factored out, simplified, reduced. I got a 5 and I've got a 2 and a 7. These cannot be reduced because 5, there's nothing in common, so my reduced fraction then becomes 5 over 2 times 7, 14, and I'm done. So my recommendation is come down from here, and because this 3 and the 10 are already factored, you can go to 30 84ths and reduce to get to the same answer, but my recommendation is to stay with the factored form already and just factor out anything else. Let's multiply 5/8 times negative. Oh, and by the way, we've got a negative sign there as well, so that negative should have come along. Negative fraction, the entire fraction is negative. You can either say that the entire fraction is negative, or you've got negative 5 over 14. Either way, but that would be part of the answer as well. The entire answer should be negative 5/14 because there was a negative. Same thing over here. I got 5/8 times 4 times negative 4/25. My first idea would be to say, well, I've got my 5 and my 8 as a blue fraction. My green part of my fraction would be this parentheses, and I'm going to say the parentheses would be 4 times 4 over 25, and we've got one big numerator, 5 times 4, that's a multiplication. We've got one big denominator, 8 times 25, and by the way, there's a negative sign here. Let's make the entire fraction negative. We can do that, because it would be a negative times a positive would be a negative. Alright, so now we just simply kind of reduce, factor out, simplify, things like that. So I'm going to go to my blue fraction and say, well, I've got, in terms of my 5 and my 8, my 5 is 5, it's prime. 8 can be written as 2 times 2 times 2, or 2 times 4, but if we're going to go to prime factorization, let's try to do that. My 4 in my numerator over here becomes 2 times 2. My 25 in the denominator becomes 5 times 5. Go on, catch up. And now, when it's prime factored, we can reduce, cancel, simplify, factor out. Oh, by the way, I've got that negative sign as well. 5 divided by 5 is 1. Those factors, or that factor pair in the numerator and denominator, cancel out, factor out, reduce, simplify, same idea. 2 divided by 2 is 1. It kind of goes away. You can call it 1 times our remaining fraction, but it doesn't help us a whole lot, so we just kind of factor out that 1. Numerator becomes 2. Oops, sorry. Hang on a second. I'm going to erase that. Hang on a second and say, what should we have? This 2 here as well could cancel with this 2 over here. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And now, in my numerator, we'll get to that in just a second, my denominator is 2 times 5, 10. What's left in my numerator? Well, the 5's canceled out, the 2's canceled out, the 2's canceled out. Don't forget to say that there's also multiplied by 1. There's got to be a kind of a placeholder for our numerator, because it's not just 10. The answer is not just 10. It's 1 over 10. 10 is the denominator. So there's our answer, negative 1 over 10. We're going to come back to this in just a second.